Today, we're going to talk about a massive 21-year war, one that saw an entire empire crumble to dust while another rose from its ashes to become a global superpower. This is the story of the Great Northern War, a conflict that didn't just redraw the map of Europe, it completely redefined the balance of power for centuries.
At its heart, this war was really a duel between two titans. On one side, you've got Sweden's Charles XII, a teenager hailed as a military genius, a real storm of a king who just seemed unbeatable. And on the other side, Russia's Peter the Great, a czar with a single ruthless vision to forge a modern empire, no matter what it cost in blood or treasure.
So, first, let's set the stage. At the turn of the 18th century, Sweden wasn't just some country. It was a full-blown empire, a military powerhouse they called the Swedish meteor, and it absolutely dominated Northern Europe.
And the source of all that Swedish power? It was summed up in this Latin phrase: Dominium Maris Baltici. It means dominion of the Baltic Sea. See, Sweden controlled the sea's vital trade routes, and this economic stranglehold made its neighbors, Russia, Denmark, and Saxony-Poland, not just jealous, but desperate to break it.
So, Sweden's rivals, they saw their chance when the young Charles XII took the throne. They figured, hey, a teenager will be a weak and inexperienced ruler, right? So they formed a secret coalition. Their goal was simple: dismantle the Swedish Empire, piece by piece.
So in 1700, the trap was sprung. All at once, Sweden found itself facing a coordinated three-front war. You had Denmark-Norway attacking from the west, Russia from the east, and Saxony-Poland coming up from the south. The coalition's plan was pretty straightforward: crush the young king under overwhelming force.
But they had seriously underestimated their target. Charles didn't respond with fear, he responded with just astonishing speed. He personally led a bold naval invasion of Denmark, forcing them completely out of the war in just a few months. Then, he wheeled his army east and, at Narva, shattered a Russian force that was 4 times the size of his own. It was an absolute masterclass in shock and awe.
I mean, think about that for a second. In less than a year, Charles had taken out 2 of his 3 enemies. Denmark was gone, Russia was humiliated, and the rest of Europe was just in shock. The Swedish meteor now turned its fiery gaze toward the last adversary, Augustus the Strong of Saxony-Poland. But here's the thing. While Charles was off chasing victories, Russia's Tsar, Peter the Great, was learning from his defeat. For him, that humiliation at Narva wasn't the end. No, it was the beginning of a massive, radical transformation.
So while Charles was busy chasing Augustus all around Poland, Peter used that precious time to completely remake his country. He studied Western techniques, he built factories, he reformed the government, and, most importantly, he built a new army from the ground up, a professional force trained in modern tactics and equipped with modern firearms. His goal was simple: get Russia its window to the west by securing a port on the Baltic Sea.
With the main Swedish army totally occupied in Poland, Peter started his countermove. He was smart about it. He avoided a direct fight. Instead, he started methodically seizing Swedish fortresses along the Baltic coast, starting with Neudeborg in 1702. He was slowly, patiently clawing back a foothold on the sea.
And then came this incredibly bold, just audacious move. In 1703, on land he had just captured from Sweden, Peter founded a new city, St. Petersburg. Think about that. He was literally building his future capital on enemy territory. It was a huge political statement and a direct challenge to Swedish power in the region. Meanwhile, Charles was achieving his own goals. He spent 6 long years meticulously dismantling Augustus II's power base, eventually chasing him all the way back to Saxony and forcing him off the Polish throne. So tactically, yeah, he was winning, but strategically, he was losing invaluable time, just letting Peter build up his army and solidify his gains in the Baltic.
By 1707, Charles had finally dealt with Poland. He was at the absolute peak of his power and fame, and he made the fateful decision to turn his legendary army east and march directly into the heart of Russia to crush Peter the Great once and for all.
And this is maybe the war's most critical turning point. Peter, knowing the Swedish army was basically invincible, offered a peace deal. He said he'd give back every single territory he had captured, except for his new city, St. Petersburg. But Charles, he refused. He wanted total victory, the complete and utter destruction of his enemy. It was a gamble for everything.
That gamble did not pay off. The Russian army refused to face Charles head-on.
Instead, they just retreated, burning everything in their path. And then came the winter of 1708, one of the coldest on record. The Swedes froze and starved. To make matters even worse, a massive Swedish supply column was ambushed and completely destroyed. The once invincible Swedish war machine was slowly being bled white by the Russian landscape itself.
By this summer of 1709, the weakened, exhausted Swedish army had laid siege to the fortress of Poltava, and Peter the Great decided the time was finally right. He marched his new, modern Russian army to meet them. This was it, the decisive confrontation.
This was the question on everybody's mind. For 9 years, Charles had known nothing but victory. But now, his army was a shadow of its former self, and it was facing a larger, better supplied, and completely reformed Russian force on its home turf.
Poltava was the climax of the entire war. The starving veterans of Europe's most feared army were now facing the product of Peter's relentless reforms. The future of 2 entire empires was going to be decided in a single day.
The result, it was a complete reversal of fortunes. The Swedish army wasn't just defeated, it was annihilated.
The fallout from Poltava was immediate and for Sweden, catastrophic. The bulk of its legendary army surrendered. King Charles himself was wounded and forced to flee south into exile. And as soon as news of the defeat spread, Sweden's old enemies, Denmark and Saxony, immediately rejoined the war, eager to pick apart the crumbling empire.
Poltava was the decisive blow, for sure, but the war would actually drag on for another 12 brutal years. The outcome, though, was no longer in doubt. All that was left was to watch the new order that this conflict had forged in fire.
The Treaty of Mistad in 1721 made the new reality official. Sweden was broken, its empire was gone, its dominion over the Baltic completely shattered, and in its place stood a new, formidable power. Peter the Great had secured his window to the west, and Russia had arrived on the world stage, not just as a regional force, but as a major European empire.
Charles XII, he eventually returned from exile but was killed in battle in 1718. He never even saw the final peace treaty that sealed his empire's fate. His death truly marked the end of an era, and with the war's end, Russia's new status as a major European empire was set in stone.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. What if Charles had just accepted that peace deal? Would the Swedish Empire have survived? Would Russia have ever become the power that it did? It was one decision, one king's refusal to compromise, that ultimately changed the course of history for 2 nations, and for an entire continent.